So, hello students. Today I will continue with the next topic, that is menstrual cycle. So, in menstrual cycle, first I'll be explaining about what is the definition of menstrual cycle, and then what is menstruation, then other other of its features I'll be explaining. So, in menstrual cycle, so I'll be referring this diagram to explain the menstrual cycle. So this diagram is about what all occurs during the menstrual cycle in different levels. Okay. So if you see this diagram, first the horizontal axis here, that is the here they have given the number of days. Then within the range of the days, what is the stage of menstrual cycle? And within the next range, what is the stage? Like that, stages are given with relation to number of days. Okay. And in vertical axis, events occurring. So events can occur at different levels. So here in what is the condition in case of pituitary hormone is given? What happens in the ovary, that is ovarian events are given. That is, then what happens in to the ovarian hormones during these stages, that also is explained. And finally the uterine event, that is the ovarian event as well as the uterine event. So the ovarian event and the uterine event is given. Okay. So here you can see this is the ovarian event. Got? So this is the ovarian event occurring, and therefore uh, so two events which are important is then ovarian event, and the next is uterine event. Okay, this is the ovarian event and this will be the uterine events. Okay, so now what is the definition of menstrual cycle? I will begin with explaining as to what is the definition of the menstrual cycle. So first of all, it is a reproductive cycle occurring in a particular animals only. That is, then the primates it will be occurring. So it is a reproductive cycle occurring in female here. So you should know that menstrual cycle is female property. Menstrual cycle is the property of female. So here, so it will be occurring in female. Okay. So this is going to occur in the female. So therefore, menstrual cycle is an event occurring only in female. Okay. It is not the reproductive event occurring in the male. So it is reproductive cycle occurring in the female of primates. Which are those primates? Apes, monkey, human, and human. Gorilla, chimpanzees, monkeys, human, these are primates. Okay, they belong to a particular order in mammals. So the reproductive cycle that occurs in the female of a primate, that reproductive cycle is called as a menstrual cycle. Okay. So now what does it is characterized? When does this cycle begin? As you studied earlier, so after the birth, so once the birth occurs and death, birth and death, if you take the scale here, so phases will be there. Okay. So what is this phase? Is the juvenile phase. This is the reproductive phase and senescence. Okay. Reproductive phase and senescence. So menstrual cycle will not usually, it is not occurring here in the juvenile phase. It is going to occur here in the reproductive phase. Now, reproductive phase, how it is identified? By the beginning of puberty. By the beginning of puberty, which phase will start as the reproductive phase will start. And one of those reproductive events occurring once the puberty sets in the female is nothing but the menstrual cycle. So menstrual cycle occurs in the female of a primate. Okay. Then what are other characteristics of menstrual cycle? Now, first time during puberty, when menstrual cycle begins or when menstruation begins, then that phenomena is called menarche. That is called as menarche. Menarche. So, what is menarche? Menarche is first menstruation that begins during the puberty. So, the definition of this will be first menstruation that begins in puberty. Puberty. That first menstruation is called as. So before that, you should know what is a. This is one of the characteristic features of the one of the step of the menstrual cycle. So menstrual cycle is associated with the discharge from the female. So therefore, you should know in primates there is discharge. In primates, it is characterized by presence of discharge. So this discharge is basically due to breaking of endometrium. Okay. But whereas other mammals, if you consider, which are non-primates, they do not have menstrual cycle. Instead, the non-primates, like it can be sheep, goat, horse, deer, bat, all these non-primates will not have menstrual cycle. It means it is there is absence of discharge in those non-primates. Then how is it uh, characterized? In non-primates, it's characterized by the phase where it's called as the period of heat. The phase where the body temperature also increases and certain hormonal level increases, and that period is called period of heat. Okay, or estrus period it is called, and this cycle is called as estrus cycle. So you came to know that primates will have menstrual cycle, whereas non-primates will have estrus cycle. Primates will have discharge, whereas non-primates do not have discharge, but instead they undergo estrus period, or also called period of heat. Okay. So in primates, the endometrium is not reabsorbed. That's why it is discharged. Whereas in case of non-primates, what happens is endometrium is reabsorbed. So this is about definition of menstrual cycle, and then what is a term called menarche. This is characterized first time discharge will be called as menarche. And remember here, it is not just primate, it should be again concentrated that this cycle will occur in female of the primate. Now, so what is the length of the menstrual cycle? Length of menstrual cycle is represented in this diagram horizontally here. So it will begin from day 1 and then normally it will end in day 29. And suppose if the discharge begins, that is considered to be the first phase, first day, till the next 28 or 29 days. So it means menstrual cycle occurs, menstrual cycle occurs, that means the length of the menstrual cycle is 28 days on an average. So length is average 28 days. So is it 28 days for all women or it might slightly vary? It will vary. The length of the menstrual cycle can be less than 28 in some women or it can be more than 28 days in some women. But this is an average or the general normal number of days. That is the length of the menstrual cycle. Now, after the first and 28 days, the next will be cycle again begins. So next will be again day 1 to again day 28. Then after day 28, again day 1 starts. So the length of menstrual cycle itself is 28 days. Got? So it will begin with the day of menses or menstruation occurs. Okay. So it means every 28 days, menstrual cycle is going to get repeated. "28 days on an average, normally, 8 days, menstrual cycle repeats." Got? So then definition can also be the same here. So as the time period between one see, since the discharge is occurring here, this will be the first day and next discharge will be after the 20th day, that will begin the first day, like that. So it means that the length of time between one menstruation and the next menstruation, day 1, day 2, once it starts, that time period, that period is called as menstrual cycle. Also you can tell, instead of that means reproductive cycle is a definition here, but it will be spanning the region between two menstruations, that is between one menstruation and the next menstruation, the gap or the time that comes between here, that will be the menstrual cycle. Okay, even, and that means another way of defining the menstrual cycle. Okay, then what yesterday I have explained about a phenomena called ovulation. So what is ovulation? Also I told that in the ovary, okay, as the follicles develop, primary follicle, secondary follicle, tertiary follicle, and finally Graafian follicles. Okay, so as this Graafian follicle develop, the Graafian follicle is going to move towards the periphery, and whatever the ovum is there, it is going to be discharged. So it means the ovum is going to be discharged. The ovum is in which state? Secondary oocyte stage. Immature oocyte. Secondary oocyte stage. The secondary oocyte stage present in graphene follicle will be released. This phenomena is called ovulation. Now, menstrual cycle. This ovulation will occur in more or less the middle of the menstrual cycle. More or less middle of the menstrual cycle. What is that middle of the menstrual cycle? Will be 14th day. Exactly the middle of the 28th day here. It will be 14th day. So that 14th day, 14th day, due to hormone, there is a release of ovum. Understand? The ovum is going to be released here. Okay. Ovum is going to be released. Okay. So here the ovum is going to be released. Understand? So now when the ovum is going to be released in 14th day, and that 14th day will come in the middle of the menstrual cycle. That is what is should be known. Okay. So these are some of the features of the menstrual cycle, as well as the what nature is there, what is the definition, what happens during the menstrual cycle. So key points which you should know, that menstrual cycle is a reproductive event occurring in the primate. Its length will be 28 days. In the middle of it, what is released is ovum is released by alternate ovary actually. And then what you should know, it repeats every month. This cycle continues to repeat every month. Now next is phases of menstrual cycle. Now, what are the stages or phases of menstrual cycle? There are four main phases in the menstrual cycle, and they occur in sequence only. So they have to be remembered in sequence only. So it is good to know the sequence of the menstrual cycle. Now, those sequences, menstrual phase. First phase is menstrual phase. Then second phase is called follicular phase. So that is the second follicular phase. And the third phase, follicular phase, has another name. It's also called proliferative phase. It's also called proliferative phase. Third phase is ovulatory phase. And the fourth phase is nothing but the luteal phase. Luteal phase. Luteal phase is also called secretory phase. So these are the four stages occurring in menstrual cycle. Menstruation or menstrual phase, follicular phase, luteal phase. So what comes last here will be in between, in the middle here will be the ovulatory phase. So these cycles, when the menstrual cycle itself will repeat, even these cycles also are going to get repeated. So if the menstrual cycle begins here, first is the menstrual phase, then follicular phase, then ovulatory phase, and then what? Luteal phase. And the cycle repeats after every 28 days. After every 28 days, the cycle is going to get repeated. Now, then that which I have already explained. So this is about the phases. Now, first I'll explain about the menstrual phase. So this phase, this is called the menstrual phase. Understand? And during menstrual phase, what all events, what is the condition, what is the fate of the pituitary, what happens to the pituitary hormone, what ovarian event happens, what uterine events happen, and what are the ovarian hormones, what is their condition, all that you will come to know in this particular figure, graphical representation. So first one is menstruation phase. First phase, menstrual phase. Now, from where to where, how many number of days it might last. So these are average values. It may not be fixed for all women. Okay, some may have less or some may have a bit more. But more or less what is fixed is luteal. So this is menstrual phase it is. Menstrual phase will last for day 1 to day 5. So between this period that is from day 1 to day 5, what phase will be there as the menstrual phase is going to be present. So here this phase, okay, day 1 to day 3. Got? So the next is, so number of days. So first to fifth day of which cycle? Of menstrual cycle. The first to fifth day is called as the menstrual phase of the menstrual cycle. Now, what is the nature of this particular phase? One of the characteristic features of this particular phase, so this is phase, okay. Then how many days discharge will occur? That also depends. Now, one of the characteristic features of this particular phase is menstrual discharge. Menstrual discharge. This also can be called as menstrual flow. This can also be called as menstrual flow. Now, why this particular discharge occurs or flow occurs? Everything is hormonally controlled. Now, how is that? You all know that human reproductive system which you have studied, human reproductive system which you have studied, and this is the only a portion of it, the remaining is just symmetric of it. So here the inner lining of the uterus or the womb, this is the cervix and this will be the vagina. So the inner lining, the wall of the uterus have 3 layers. Okay, one is called perimetrium, the middle is called endometrium, and the most innermost layer is called as, excuse me, the outermost is called as perimetrium, the middle one is called myometrium, and the innermost is called endometrium. So right now, consider this is the innermost layer, endometrium. Okay, the endometrium will be intact, will be maintained if there is a hormone, progesterone. But when that hormone becomes less, the endometrium tends to break. So during this phase, what happens? Progesterone concentration drops. Progesterone concentration is going to drop. When progesterone concentration drops, the endometrium cannot be maintained. So what happens? It breaks. So this results in breaking of endometrium. So when the endometrium breaks, it is that endometrium is going to be discharged outside. So along as the endometrium breaks, the endometrium is rich in blood vessels also. The small blood vessels, they also rupture. As they rupture, this results in a discharge. Now the blood will clot within the uterus, but it is dissolved by fibrinolytic enzymes like plasmin. And therefore, the blood again liquefies. So therefore, menstrual fluid, the discharge, will not clot again. Okay, so this is about the discharge. So progesterone concentration drops. Because of this only results in breakdown of endometrium. And broken endometrium, what it happens is it is released outside the body through vagina, that is through an opening called vaginal orifice. Okay, then how many days the flow? So average length of this phase is 1. The flow can be for how many days? The discharge can last for how many days? So as it is already told, 1 to 5th day is the day for this phase. The flow can last for 3 days to some of them, 4 days to some of them, or 5 days to some of them. So therefore here this was about the what do you call menstruation or discharge will occur here. This flow or discharge is important, and that is connected to the breakdown of endometrium. Breakdown of endometrium. And breakdown is related to drop in the concentration of progesterone hormones. So titer of this hormone is going to reduce in the blood. So now, in some women, there is no discharge. So in some women, there is absence of discharge. First of all, you should know that discharge is known by the term called menorrhea. Also, another term that describes the discharge is menorrhea. Now, absence of discharge will be what? Amenorrhea. Okay. So, which all conditions there will be no discharge? Absence of discharge or menstruation absence of discharge, menstrual discharge will be due to certain conditions. So, amenorrhea or discharge, lack of discharge will be present, will be there. Lack of discharge or no discharge will be there during pregnancy. So, lack of discharge can indicate pregnancy. Then second, lactation. So during lactation for the period of around 6 months, during lactation also there is no menstruation. What is lactation? Release of milk by mammary glands is called lactation. Production of milk by mammary glands is called lactation. When does it begin? After the parturition, after the delivery process, lactation process starts. And this lactation for the next 6 months, during lactation period, usually there is a presence of prolactin as well as gonadotropins are suppressed here. As a result, there is no discharge. Because of absence of certain hormones, what happens? Some of these events in the cycles will get disturbed. As a result, no menstruation occurs. So, so absence of discharge will be in case of pregnancy. So there is third reason also, hormonal imbalance, of course. If a person gets an hormonal imbalance due to various conditions, it can be stress, it can be environment, other environment factors that make a person stressful, all those factors that can contribute to hormonal imbalance. Even in that case, there is no menstruation. So, but commonly the menstruation is absent in case of pregnancy and in case of lactation. So, amenorrhea is in pregnancy as well as lactation. So this was, so an indicator of pregnancy will be nothing but an absence of menstruation or discharge. Then how much amount of blood will be discharged? On an average, this is an average value, it cannot be fixed for all women. From 30 to 50 ml of blood can be discharged. And I told that menstrual blood cannot clot because it would have already been clotted, but the clot is digested by fibrinolytic enzyme. Therefore, the menstrual blood again liquefies and that cannot be clotted again, since all the clotting factors are utilized. Now, second phase. So if you see this men's first phase, you should know the day here till fifth day it will go maximum. Flow can be for the third day or up till even fourth day or fifth day. Now, 1 to 5th day is the normal range. For some, it can end in third day. The discharge can end in third day. Now, during this time, what is the uterine event occurring? Breakage of endometrium leading to menses, you can tell, menstruation, you can tell, or discharge, all the same. Now, what happens? What is the condition of ovarian hormones? So, two ovarian hormones are there, estrogen and progesterone. So, they are not reaching to the peak. Their concentration is, you cannot tell they are totally absent, but their concentration is not increasing here during. Instead, due to this, due to one of the key hormone that maintains this endometrium, this whole tissue is the endometrial tissue occurring in the uterus or the womb. Then during menstrual, so what happens here? The condition ovarian event will be occurring. See, what happens is the follicles still tend to show development here. So you can see follicles are developing here. Okay. So that will be event occurring in the ovarian event during menstruation. So still slowly they will be progressing to develop. Now, what happens to the pituitary hormones? FSH, LH also their levels are less. Okay, that will be the condition in case of menstrual phase. Out of that, the key hormone during menstruation is the reduction in the concentration or drop in the concentration of progesterone. This drives the discharge, release of discharge, breaking of endometrium and the subsequent release of the discharge. The next phase, as it is already given here, it is called as follicular phase. So follicular phase has another name, proliferative phase. It's also called proliferative phase. It is also called proliferative phase. Okay. Now, if you see the number of days from where to where it comes, the proliferative phase. First to fifth day is menstruation, and next day will be the sixth day. Next day will be which day? Sixth day it will be. From sixth day to which day? 14th day. In the mid of the menstrual cycle, what will be there? Ovulation will be there. So what happens? For the 14th day, one day before it, 13th day. So from 6th to 13th day will be the day, the day for the days, range of days for the follicular phase. Now, which is that? Fifth day was menstrual, so sixth day. From 6th to 13th day, because 14th day will be the next phase. So from 6th to 13th day will be the day for follicular phase, also called proliferative phase. Now, if you see, if you see this name, follicular phase, it is indicative of follicles here. So, these structures will be developing primary, secondary, tertiary, and the Graafian follicle. Now, these structures will be developing in the ovary. So, it is an ovarian event. Now, as the name indicates, follicular phase, during this phase, the follicles will be developing, growing. That is from primary follicle to secondary follicle to tertiary follicle and Graafian follicle. So, it will develop these development or growth of follicles occur during this phase. Now, what are those follicles? Primary follicle develops into secondary follicle, develops into tertiary follicle, and develops ultimately into Graafian follicle. This is last one called Graafian follicle. So this one, Graafian follicle, is a mature follicle. Graafian follicle is called as the mature follicle. Understand? So mature Graafian follicle also is called. It means that Graafian follicle ultimately should develop from a primary follicle. How is it developing? How is it growing? You can see the primary follicle, secondary, then tertiary antrum appears, means it is tertiary, and then it forms the Graafian follicle. Then it is going to rupture in the middle, means or somewhere in 14th day, ovulatory phase occurs. That's the next phase, I'll explain. So this development of follicle will be occurring during this phase. From primary to Graafian follicle, it will occur during the 6th to 13th day, and this phase is also called follicular phase. Understand? So during this time, endometrium becomes thickened, or it grows, or you can tell it regenerates. Okay. So during this time, growth of endometrium occurs. Growth of endometrium occurs. You can tell regeneration of endometrium occurs, or endometrium starts becoming thicker and thicker. So you can see the endometrium, because of discharge, the endometrium becomes thin because it is discharged in the form of, and you can also know that endometrium is not totally slowing off. Okay. So it means there are divisions further in endometrium, the stratum basalis and functionalis. So functionalis that get discharged. So after the discharge, the endometrium becomes very thin. Then again during follicular phase, it becomes thicker and thicker, and it will start growing. So that is called the growth of endometrium, or you can tell regeneration of endometrium. Then how is this regeneration possible? Through mitosis, through proliferation. Rapid mitosis occurs. Proliferation occurs here. That means the blood vessels grow. You try, okay, and the cells present in the endometrium start dividing fast and they become thicker and thicker. And how is that possible? Is as the follicles grow, it is the follicles that will secrete estrogen. I told you the secretory part is the theca interna, the theca cells, the theca interna. They will secrete an hormone called estrogen, which in turn is responsible for the growth of the endometrium. Okay, so basically, these all events will be controlled by pituitary hormone and ovarian hormones. Pituitary hormones, FSH, LH, ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone. So their concentration ultimately determines the menstrual cycle events. Okay, so what changes occur in ovary? What changes occur in uterus? So always you should know that this, keep it in mind here. So this will be, so this will be the uterus, and this will be the, here this will be the ovarian event. So what events occur in ovary or the uterus depends on levels of the pituitary hormones, as well as it is not just being high or low. They should be high or low in a particular phase in a correct pattern. Only then the menstrual cycle will be normal. Any changes occur or deviation occur from this particular cycle, it may disturb the balance, and as a result, there is absence of menstruation. Okay. So then, what happens during this time is there is some concentration of FSH, even though the peak is not shown here. But slowly, what happens? The concentration of FSH will start increasing. Gradually, it will be increasing. It will not peak suddenly. So, gradually, it is going to increase. This increase in the FSH will help in stimulating the follicles. So, therefore, there is a increase in FSH during this phase. Okay, that means follicle stimulating hormone starts increasing slowly. As a result, what happens? Because of this hormone, these will these will get stimulated to develop or grow. Okay, so this all growth is due to gradual increase in FSH. When the growth will complete, when Graafian follicle is formed, that can be possible when the FSH is going to increase. So once FSH will stimulate follicles, and follicles will produce estrogen, and estrogen results in thickening of the endometrium. Okay, so that will be regarding the what is called uh, follicular phase events. Okay, so that's my name. Remember, very easy. In case of female, FSH means follicle stimulating hormone. However, even in the male, it is called FSH, but there it has a role in spermatogenesis, and here it has a role in development of follicle as well as oogenesis. So next is the female hormone called estrogen and its function. Female hormone estrogen. Female hormone estrogen and its effect and its functions. First of all, it will induce mitotic divisions. First is estrogen will induce mitotic divisions. Divisions where? In cells, of course, because it's the cell that undergoes mitotic divisions in the cells. Now, which cells? See, this term itself is known by proliferation. Mitotic division, fast mitotic divisions can also be known as proliferation. Now, induce mitotic division in cells. In which cells? in follicular cells rapidly divide and multiple layers are formed, estrogen due to estrogen. And the cells in the uterus, uterine event, the cells present in the endometrium also divide rapidly, they proliferate. Understand? That proliferative function is due to estrogen. Then, second function of, uh, so when the cell will divide, the broken endometrium again will regenerate and repair. So it will help in repair of the broken endometrium, that is tissue and the blood. So when it regenerates, it automatically helps even in the repair of the lost endometrium. Understand? Then thickening, thicken endometrium. So these are some of the functions. It can also, last function is it can also aid in follicular development. Okay, so these are the different functions of what is called the estrogen, which is a female hormone. Apart from these, estrogen in female during puberty, even when this hormone is increasing, it is responsible for secondary sexual characters in male. Excuse me, secondary sexual characters in female, it is responsible. So it's a female hormone. Understand? So those secondary sexual characters helps to identify and differentiate a male from a female. So that characters are due to the estrogen. So two female hormones you should know, the progesterone and estrogen. The next is then what else will be uh, what happens as the estrogen. So as follicle develop, these follicular cells will produce estrogen. So slowly what increases? Estrogen is going to increase because they are released by this follicle. So estrogen is going to increase. Now as estrogen increases, it will stimulate pituitary to produce what? LH. Okay, resulting in the next phase. So remember, secretion of LH by pituitary is due to estrogen itself. So here what happens in the next phase, uh, FSH LH slowly starts increasing during the end of this proliferative phase. Then which phase is attained is the shortest phase in the entire menstrual cycle, will be the middle of it. That is the ovulatory phase. So now I will explain about the ovulatory phase. So ovulatory phase is the important event occurring. Which day it will come? It will come on 14th day. 14th day is average like a middle of the menstrual cycle. So during this day, the ovulatory phase, one of the important event occurring will be the ovulation. One of the important event occurring is called the ovulation. Okay. So what is ovulation? Again, mentioning the same thing. This is the primary follicle, secondary follicle develops into tertiary follicle, antrum appears small one, and then that develops into the Graafian follicle where antrum is big and the ovum is here. Understand? Now, as the concentration of estrogen increases, Graafian follicle moves towards the outer edges of the ovary. It means now the Graafian follicle, which was more towards the lower side of the cortex, now it is going to move towards the outer edge of the ovary or periphery of the ovary. Understand? So now what happens? LH. What happens during this phase is the second hormonal change that is occurring is LH concentration increases. LH concentration increases. So in the blood, what happens? LH concentration is going to spike up. Understand? So rapid surge in the concentration of LH occurs. So it is also called LH surge. It's also called LH surge. It is called. Okay. And of course, LH surge in turn is dependent on estrogen peaking. As estrogen increases, LH also is going to increase. So there's a positive feedback mechanism uh, is there. Got? So estrogen increases, Graafian follicle also moves towards the borders or the periphery, you can tell. And as estrogen increases, also what increases? Luteinizing hormone increases. This luteinizing hormone causes the rupture of Graafian follicle. So Graafian follicle is going to rupture due to this LH surge. So what happens? Ovum is released. Secondary oocyte, specifically ovum is okay, but ovum is not completely matured still. It's still immature. So that stage is called secondary oocyte. So what is released outside is the secondary oocyte. Understand? This phenomena of release of secondary oocyte from a mature Graafian follicle under the influence of luteinizing hormone will be called as ovulation. Understand? So, you should know about these terms like LH, surge, and all. Okay. So, this was what phase it is. It is one of the shortest phases in all the phases of menstrual cycle. This is going to be one of the shortest phase. Understand? One of the shortest phases. Got? So, ovulatory phase, one of the shortest phase. Events, these are the events occurring. So, you can see here, this is the 15th day. Then one day before is this 14th day. Okay. So, around that day, what all events are occurring in pituitary hormones? LH and FSH surge is occurring. Understand? What is happening in the ovary? Graafian follicle is rupturing, ovum is released, called ovulation. What is happening is ovarian hormone, estrogen concentration is more, but progesterone still has not increased its concentration. It will increase in the next stage. Okay. Then what is happening here in the womb or uterus? The endometrium continues to become thicker and thicker, and uterine glands also starts developing, the start secreting in the next phase, however. But during ovulatory phase, see, during menstruation, this is the characteristic feature. During follicular phase, this is the important feature. During ovulatory phase, the LH surge is an important, even though in other parts, other events will be occurring simultaneously, but the main events has to be noted in each phase. Then last phase, okay, it's called as the luteal phase. It's called as the luteal phase. Luteal phase has another name. It's called as secretory phase. Secretory phase. It's also called as secretory phase. So this phase follows ovulatory phase. When it follows ovulatory phase, definitely it's a post-ovulatory phase it is. Okay, this phase is also called post-ovulatory phase, and it is also called as secretory phase. The now number of days. Number of days here will be, so 14th day was ovulatory phase where ovulation occurred. So next to 14th day will be 15th day, and the end of menstrual cycle total length will be 28. So from 14th will be, however, ovulatory. From next day onwards, that is from 15th day, this is the 15th day, to, hmm, to 28th, the last day, 28th day. Okay, so this will amount to average of how many? It will give an average of 14 days. Okay, so this phase is here, luteal phase. So from 15th day to the last day of menstrual cycle, this whole phase is called the luteal phase. Okay, so now as I told 14th day, you can calculate the day during which there will be ovulation. For example, if you want to know the ovulation day in a woman whose menstrual cycle is not 28 day but instead it is 35 day. So total number of days in the menstruation will be subtracted with the number of days in the luteal phase, which is 14. So you will get the day of ovulation. Okay, so that is the significance here for, or there's a significance of this day. So using luteal phase to know the ovulation day, understand? Using luteal phase to know ovulation day. That means ovulation day is equal to number of days in menstrual cycle minus the luteal phase day. Say it is 14 days. Okay, so there is a woman whose menstrual cycle is, say, 32 days. Then how it can be calculated? 32 minus 14. Whatever answer you get upon subtracting 14 from 32, that answer will be the day of ovulation. Got? So that is the importance of luteal phase days. How you can use the luteal phase days. Now during this time, what happens? What has happened in the previous phase is the ovum is released. So I should draw the diagram of the female reproductive system to show the what is called, now this is the ovary, got bound to the uterus by the ovarian ligament. So here broad ligament, suspensory. Okay. So what I shall do is, since enough time is required, I'll continue the topic in the next day.